Right. Hello, everyone, and thanks to the organizers for putting this on. It's been really fun for me to learn more about zoonotic diseases from a broader perspective. I've, like many people, Rich and Jonathan, I don't study zoonotic diseases specifically, but my work overlaps with that. And so with that, today, I'm going to talk about a case study in Southeast Asia using data from our lab and how we can use that to inform zoonotic diseases. So I'll be asking, where do wildlife that carry zoonotic diseases overlap and interact with humans? And what I mean by overlap is spatially in the landscape, where are zoonotic disease carrying animals near human populations? And when I say interact, I'm referring more to where are they overlapping with people that hunt them or capture them for either Chinese traditional medicine or other uses like the pet trade. Okay, so Southeast Asia is a known zoonotic disease emergence hotspot. But if we look at this map, we don't see the brightest colors indicating the most zoonotic disease carrying species in Southeast Asia. Nonetheless, we've had SARS, COVID-19, there's Nipah, there's a lot of emergence of zoonotic diseases in this area. And so that begs a question, what is going on? Why isn't it a direct link? Why aren't we seeing the most zoonotic diseases emerging from those same places where there's the most number of species that carry those diseases? Well, what are the reasons? Could be that people are interacting with wildlife more in Southeast Asia. So what this map is showing is the number of mammal species that are threatened by hunting. And it's just a great way of bringing together the themes of this meeting, which is the biodiversity crisis in Southeast Asia is facing a biodiversity crisis due to hunting, and the potentially one of the drivers of zoonotic diseases, which is the interaction between people and mammals. Chris, I see you walk over. Is everything all right?
All good. Yep. Just wanted to see you.
No worries. Cool. So one of the larger studies that's come out recently is this review in Nature showing that zoonotic disease host diversity increases in human-dominated ecosystems. And what I'm going to try to understand is that Southeast Asia is very human-dominated relative to other large tropical forest regions. And so what they found, this is a really easy sentence that takes the majority of the paper and summarizes it. So I'm just going to read it. What they found is that known wildlife hosts of zoonotic diseases comprise a greater proportion of the local species richness and the total abundance in sites under substantial human use, including secondary agricultural and urban ecosystems, compared with undisturbed habitats. What that means is, for Southeast Asia, disturbed forests likely have higher percentages of animals that carry diseases, and the actual raw abundance of those animals, the density of those animals, is higher as well. And so I wanted to look at that. So if you see in this review, they found 184 studies. So in our lab, we've put together a database of 114 studies just from Southeast Asia that look at the wildlife communities. And as you can see from where these points are located around the region, they vary from inside huge, large continuous forests like the heart of Borneo, denoted by the dark green, right to the edges where you can barely see any forest, like in this site in Borneo, which is Lambert Hills National Park, very small patch of forest, right near a huge urban center. And we have all sorts of sites that span that gradient. And so also what you might take away from this map is, human-dominated ecosystems proliferate in Southeast Asia. This is the vast majority of the remaining area. What that means, based on the series of slides that's presented, is there's a high risk of human-wildlife interactions with those species carrying zoonotic diseases in Southeast Asia. And that poses the research question, well, let's narrow in and find exactly where do the wildlife that carry zoonotic diseases overlap with humans that hunt them. And so a great way to do this is to look at where the wildlife communities in these landscapes. And we do that in our lab using camera traps, which get a nice sample of the terrestrial mammal community in these landscapes And those terrestrial mammals carry a lot of zoonotic diseases, probably second only to bats. And we can use that to look at shifts in the whole wildlife community. So here we have some results from a dozen different landscapes where we've done camera trapping, showing that as we move from fragmented areas into edges, into intermediate and interior forests, so getting more intact, we see shifts going from more small animals at the fragments and edges compared to the interiors, and the vice versa for the large animals. And we see certain animals like large omnivores and medium-sized omnivores proliferating in the edges and the fragments. And we can put that all together to build food webs. And so this is food webs built or parameterized using the camera trap data. And we can do that to try to identify how the whole food webs are changing in these altered and these disturbed landscapes. And that's important because we actually do really care about food webs in these human-dominated landscapes, not just the species alone. And Chris already touched on this, but the reason is that there's these ecological cascades that can lead to proliferation of certain species that either carry more or less diseases. So for example, if there's a large amount of hunting and you have total defaunation of the large animals, you can see a proliferation of rodents, which again carry higher disease loads than many other species. If you have the loss of apex predators, often known as a trophic cascade, you can have a proliferation of herbivores, which again, especially when we're talking about pigs, carry larger disease loads than some apex predators. So you're going to shift there as well. And finally, you can have bottom-up resource subsidy cascades. And what that means is you have a food influx. So that could be something like an oil palm plantation that provides a food subsidy to certain species, particularly to pigs and macaques that will forage outside of the forest in oil plant plantations. And that could actually lead to a bottom-up cascade affecting predators. But what we really care about in this talk, I think, is that their pigs and macaques are going to disproportionately benefit from crops compared to more interior forest species. So all these different cascades can affect the prevalence of zoonotic disease carrying wildlife. So now I'm going to do a quick little case study to show how we use our camera trap data to actually look at this. So let's first look at some key species that carry lots of zoonotic diseases, are known to be intermediary species transmitting diseases to humans. So we got a few different species of wild pigs in Southeast Asia. These carry numerous diseases. They also spread waterborne diseases and parasites like worms, and they often venture outside forest into human areas where they can spread disease through water or food, and they're actively hunted in some communities. And then you're going to have a higher likelihood of having like a blood or other fluids mixing and the spread of disease. Macaques similarly carry many diseases that can be shared with humans. They often are found outside of forests, and they directly interact with humans by jumping into trash, going into people's houses. They live in high densities across Southeast Asian cities, and they're actually captured for research. And there's other ways that people interact with them, even tourists. So in this quick little case study, what we'll do is we'll look at a density meta-analysis we did. And we took all these studies that have looked at the density of these species, and we split them into intact forest versus degraded forest based on this metric called the Forest Landscape Integrity Index that's actually published out of a lab here at UQ. And what the important thing is, this includes the effect of edges and fragmentation and logging. And so if we split that into two groups, what we find is the density of pigs on the top, the density of macaques, shown on the bottom in red, both of those, is much higher in degraded forests. And that aligns well with that Gibb et al. Nature review that I showed earlier. And then what we did is we looked at the prevalence of these species in the whole community based on our camera trapping. And so here what we have is a camera trapping rates in degraded versus intact forest. And we have our 4 species of pigs and macaques, and then in the magenta, all other species. But to make this easy for you, I'll just show the proportion of pigs and macaques versus all other species. And you can see in degraded landscapes, the majority of captures of photographed animals in these landscapes are pigs and macaques. And those are 2 of the highest disease carrying species in these landscapes. Likewise, if we take it one step further and not just look at degraded or intact forests, we actually look at areas where more than 20% of the landscape is oil palm plantations. And again, that's because of these, what I call a bottom-up subsidy cascade, where that additional food subsidy is supporting the populations of crop-rating species. And again, pigs and macaques are crop-rating species. You can see that here you have, upwards of 80% of the total captures in these forests represented by only two groups, the pigs and macaques. And that's, less than 30% in a area of forest where there's very little oil palm. So now let's think about who's interacting with those species. And I'm going to focus in on pigs in this case. And it's important to think about how local culture influences hunting and wildlife interactions. And those hunting choices are going to be influenced by food taboos. And in the region, religion is a very strong component of food taboos. And in Southeast Asia, we have very large populations of Christian, Buddhist, and Muslim groups, and others as well. So when we think about the large components of Christian groups, they have comparatively few food taboos. The same goes with Theravada Buddhism, which is they have very few food taboos as well. And that contrasts very strongly with Islam, which has strong food taboos against eating pigs and primates. So what that means is areas where the dominant religion is Islam might have comparatively lower probability of people interacting with pigs and macaques compared to the same population density of people that are primarily practicing other religions. And so what we've done in this lab, there's a master's thesis by a student in my lab named Frances Chicas. She went and she compiled information on local religious population densities across the region so that we can actually run analyses to look at the threat of zoonotic diseases based on religion. So a final example that I'll show real quick is about civets. And civets are an important species because, or group of species, because they were the intermediary species for SARS. Now, what I want to highlight in this example is civets are a big group of animals. So we have the banded civet. We also have the Malay civet, the small Indian civet, the binturong, our largest civet. We have our mass palm civet. And then does anyone know what these two are? They're not even civets. They just look like them. What my point is that if we say, oh, civets are a high risk species because we know that like the mass palm civet, which was the one that was responsible for SARS, it's very common in edges and around people. So if we applied that knowledge to the whole civet group, we might be misled. And so to show that, what we've done here is we've taken our camera trapping data, we've used it to run maxent habitat suitability analyses. We've done this first for the common palm civet, and we see that their population increases with human population. So this is a species that is human commensal. And this work is done by a student named Bastian, who's just about to start his PhD here at UQ in my lab. And we contrast that, we contrast that with the banded civet. The banded civet has a very negative relationship with human population. So the complete opposite trend. And this work is led by Ashley Dunn, who's a master's student here at UQ. Okay, so that's what I want to present. And then I also just want to give a little shout out or teaser to what I'm trying to do here at UQ, which is to build a large camera trapping data synthesis center so that we can repeat the same sort of analyses that I was doing in Southeast Asia, including with one angle of that being to look at zoonotic diseases here in Australia. And then what that requires though is sharing of camera trap data. And just to compare the sharing of camera trap data in other countries like America versus Australia, Australians are not leading the way with sharing their camera trap data. And so in order to get around that problem, one of my goals is to engage our NGO and government stakeholders to create a synthesis center, maybe something called a wildlife observatory. And we'll partner with existing groups to process new data. We'll hopefully have some co-funded positions, and we'll funnel our results into Threatened Species Index, which addresses the biodiversity crisis, but also to zoonotic disease research. And that can hopefully be used to map and monitor terrestrial wildlife zoonotic disease hosts across Australia. Thank you.